You. Good morning and welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome here in the sanctuary, welcome there online on the holy interwebs. I'm delighted that you are choosing to spend this time here today with us this morning. It's a special day. It's a special day. We have some special guests whom I will introduce in just a little bit, and they will share their story of becoming, stories of becoming. Friday. I think it was Friday. Was it not Friday at Old Dog? The Kalamazoo Library organized a night of reading banned books and music. And there were two musical guests. They were both, they still are actually, both gay, and Chris Matthews and Bitch. And it was fantastic. And leading up to this service, I kept wondering what would be a very good opening, some good opening, that catches you right away. And I just could not come up with it. And then somebody from the library read a story, and I thought, that's it. So here it is. Of course, you're already on a hook, right? That's what I thought. So this is a book by David Levithan, and the title of the book is Boy Meets Boy, and the title of this little reading is an excerpt, is Paul is Gay. I've always known I was gay, but it wasn't confirmed until I was in kindergarten. It was my teacher who said so. It was right there on my kindergarten report card. Paul is definitely gay and has very good sense of self. I saw it on her desk one day before nap time, and I have to admit, I might not have realized I was different if Mrs. Benchley hadn't pointed it out. I mean, I was 5 years old. I just assumed boys were attracted to other boys. Why else would they spend all of their time together playing on teams and making fun of the girls? I assumed it was because we all liked each other. I was unclear how girls fit into the picture, but I thought I knew the boy thing A-OK. Imagine my surprise to find out that I wasn't entirely right. Imagine my surprise when I went through all the other reports and found out that no one of the other boys had been labeled definitely gay. In all fairness, none of the others had a very good sense of self either. Mrs. Benchley caught me at her desk and looked quite alarmed. Since I was more than a little confused, I asked her for some clarification. Am I definitely gay? I asked. Mrs. Benchley looked me over and nodded. What's gay? I asked. It's when a boy likes other boys, she explained. I pointed over to the painting corner where Greg Easton was wrestling on the ground with Ted Halpern. Is Greg gay? I asked. No, Mrs. Benchley answered. At least not yet. Interesting. I found it all very interesting. Mrs. Benchley explained a little more to me, the whole boys like girls thing. I can't say I understood. Mrs. Benchley asked me if I'd noticed that marriages were mostly made up of men and women. I had never really thought of marriages as things that involved liking. I had just assumed this man-woman arrangement was yet another adult quirk, like flossing. Now Mrs. Benchley was telling me something much bigger, some sort of silly global conspiracy. But that's not how I feel, I protested. My attention was a little distracted because Ted was now pulling up Greg Easton's shirt, and that was kind of cool. How I feel is what's right. Right? For you, yes, Mrs. Benchley told me. What you feel is absolutely right for you. Always remember that. And I have, sort of. That night, I held my big news until after my favorite Nickelodeon block was over. My father was in the kitchen doing dishes. My mother was in the den with me, reading on the couch. Quietly, I walked over to her. Guess what? I said. She jumped up, then tried to pretend she hadn't been surprised. Since she didn't close her book, she only marked the page with her finger. I knew I didn't have much time. What? She said. I'm gay. Parents never react the way you want them to. I thought at the very least my mother would take her finger out of the book, but no. Instead, she turned in the direction of the kitchen and yelled to my father, Honey, Paul's learned a new word. It took my parents a couple of years, but eventually they got used to it. Today, you will hear 3 stories of becoming. And coming out stories are legion. Good ones are far and few in between. Today, you will hear 3. You will hear how it all evolves, that there is not one coming out story, but that there's many. There's always a first coming out story. And after that, there are many. And today, you will hear 3 experiences. So I want you to open your minds. And I want you to open your hearts. And I want your whole soul to envelop every single one of us in here today. And today, here, there shall be nothing but love and healing and a togetherness that should be every day, everywhere, all the time. So our first guest is Kelly. Kelly is a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Please come here, Kelly. She's also a local artist. And in January, her art will be on that wall. So please, all welcome Kelly. If you wish to applaud, do it. But in any case, with hearts open, minds open, we welcome you, Kelly. Please step here so the camera can get you. Thank you. Give us just a second, please. Okay, we're getting a better mic. There's always something, isn't there? There you go, Kelly.
Okay, that's better. I'm a terrible public speaker, and I was. Oh my God, no, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in rural northern Michigan, and oh, it can look all familiar. Okay, I'll do my best. Okay, this is much better. Okay, I feel official. And I'm glad G told this story because that helped me kind of get over nerves. I don't do environments such as this very often, usually for funerals. So I grew up in rural northern Michigan in the 80s and 90s. And, you know, eventually decided that something was broken, and tried to live the life that was expected of someone like me. And the short version is I kind of gave up on a lot of things in order to do what was expected. And it kind of got into everything down to what I chose to go to college for and everything. It was, art was a passion. What did I go to school for? Mathematics and computer science. So, and it was because that was what I was told to do. A lot of things happened that way. Many things in my life ended up being, what do I need to do to fill this role? And it has resulted in decades of depression, and other problems that are a little more serious that I'm not going to get into, because otherwise I'm going to just start crying, because I cry really easy. But a few years ago, my grandmother died, and that was when I realized I needed to get into therapy. And we started treating the depression, and realized I got to a point where I was like, well, I have all these great coping skills, but it's not really treating the problem, it's treating the symptoms. But I still refuse to accept that this was a thing. There had to be some other reason. My therapist says, is there anything you're not telling me? I said, well, I'm not ready to tell you that yet. But 5 months later, I said, Elaine, there's something I need to talk to you about. And that's when I started the coming out process. And I am apparently still coming out 3 years later. Is it 3 or 4? 20, 21, 22, 23, 3 years. 3 years? Almost 4 years. Math on a Sunday morning on very little sleep. I came out to my ex-wife first, and we are still friends, but it has changed the dynamic of our relationship. It's difficult to convince a straight spouse to want to be in a queer marriage. Ultimately we found an equilibrium, but it took a lot of time. My kids were the second people I came out to. And incidentally, I think I was getting a jump on coming out day in 2020, because it was about 4 or 5 days beforehand. And it was after a month and a half of writing everything out, going over it with the ex, going over it with my therapist, back and forth. There was a lot of paperwork. I have a lot of paperwork that is me writing down, here's what I need to tell people. And my kids were okay. And just for brevity, I said, this is my biggest secret. And my son, who was 11 years old at the time, said, well, you want to know what my biggest secret is? I said, what's that? And he says, well, I farted. And I was like, oh my gosh, I put way too much pressure on myself. So 11 years old, thank you. And then the next people were my parents and my brother, which was about 3 months worth of writing, rewriting. I've got about 7 versions of that script. And eventually I didn't need any of it. I planned to drive up to spend the afternoon with my family and said, I'm coming home no matter what. And I went up there and I existed for the afternoon, and we sat down to dinner. Everyone had pizza or something, I guess. And we're sitting there and we get done and I go, there's something I need to tell you. And I laid out the short version, and my mom's like, we don't need to know the details right now. And my brother looks at me like mouthful of pizza and he's like, did you just say what I think you said? And I said, yeah. And he goes, oh. And he goes back to eating pizza. And my dad looked shocked. And I wasn't sure how he was taking it, because it did not look like it was going well. But he was the first one to hug me afterwards. And six months later, well, let me rewind. Afterwards, everyone gave me hugs, and my brother says, "What kind of person does it make me seem like that you're gonna break news like that, and I'm just gonna keep eating pizza?" Which was very very sweet and very funny, and it lightened the mood, because otherwise it was very, very scary. And about 6 months later, my mom actually sat down to talk to me about it, and she had spoken with her sisters and asked me questions and stuff like that. And the highlight from that conversation was, "How did you decide what name you were taking?" And I said, "I just felt right." And she said, "Well, it's weird because that was one of the names that we had loaded up in case you were born that way." And I was like, I had no idea. I didn't, honestly. I just stumbled across it. So this is very nice. And since then, I've had a trickle of my old friends. I have let them come to me if they're interested, and most of them have come back. The few that haven't are people I didn't really interact that much with anyway. And I came out at work last year, and it shed light on something that no one thinks about. I was telling G this story earlier. I was talking to our HR director, and she's like, "How can I support you?" Blah blah blah. And we start chatting, and I said, "We've got 2 like single person bathrooms in the office, and they're exactly the same, but one says men and one says women. Why is that?" And she was like, "I don't know." and I'm like, "It doesn't make sense, does it?" And she's like, "It does not." And like 2 weeks later, they had different signs that said gender neutral on the bathrooms. And since then, I've had my mom and dad have spoken with extended family. I've had some cousins get back into touch with me, and they've been fantastic. I was recently at a funeral for my uncle. Well, it wasn't really a funeral, it was more of a party. And everyone was so glad to see me, and family that I didn't think was going to be very accepting was very supportive. And it's not lost on me exactly how fortunate I am. I've been going to the support groups at Outfront since 2020, and my story is not typical at all. There are a lot of people who have a lot more problems than I do, with family and friends, and the sacrifices they have to make in order to do this. So it's not lost on me, just how fortunate I am. But on the upside, there were a lot of things I locked away when I locked myself away. G mentioned that like I'm an artist of sorts, like and I locked that away in my teens, and there's like I have work from my early to mid-teens, and then there's a lot of nothing in my drawing pads and books and stuff until last March. I finally was like, well, let's see, how much rust is on this. And since then I've been in, I had a piece in the Art Hop in March. I got selected for the 2013 LGBTQ plus in Michigan artists exhibition in Lansing this year. I'm going to be at the Art Hop in November somewhere. Don't know where yet. And it's the doors that have opened since coming out has been amazing. I finished college after failing out. I did not get that degree in computer science. I actually had a lot of substance abuse issues and failed out. But I've gone back, I've taken a whole bunch of art classes, and I at least have an associate's degree, and I'll be walking in December. So in the Uperdome, it's gonna be great. But you know, I'm finishing college, I'm displaying art. I feel like I'm a better parent. I'm more interested in what my family is doing. I've met amazing people. And a couple of them are people who are also going to speak here. Just the one thing, and I think maybe this is the main point, is I was miserable for a lot of years, and was ready to just, it can be over any time and I'll be just fine. I realized that there was a path I was supposed to walk, and sorry, I'm fidgety, but there's a path I was supposed to walk, I think, and trying to fit the role that my physical attributes when I was born laid out for me was not the right path, because you know, choosing to walk this path has everything's just kind of fallen into place, and it feels like I'm on the right path. So I do have one thing I wanted to read because it's important to me. I just gotta find it, and then I gotta blow it up big enough for my old eyes. So I wrote a paper for one of my final classes, and I'm not gonna read the whole thing. But for one of my finals, we had to do an analysis, and Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is one of my favorites. And I've read it probably every other year since I bought it in 1994. And I never realized why this book was important to me. It's just always one of my favorites. Everything's written long. It's hard to read because it's in Victorian English. And I never quite figured it out until I read it through the lens that I'm reading it through this year. And in the middle section of the book, the monster describes living next to a family of French exiles, where he observes how they deal with one another, how they treat one another, how they speak, and all this stuff. And he says something, because he wants to reveal himself and find a family with these people. And he says, I looked upon them as superior beings who would be the arbiters of my future destiny. I formed in my imagination 1,000 pictures of presenting myself to them and their reception of me. I imagined that they would be disgusted until by my gentle demeanor and conciliating words, I should win their favor and afterwards their love. And I know a lot of us feel that way. That was kind of the whole idea, because it's all any of us are really looking for at the end of the day. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Well, the next guest is Nadine, a friend of mine. She is also on the board of Outfront. And well, thank you for sharing your story. Kelly, thank you.
Thank you, G. Thank you, Kelly. So yes, Kelly and I are good friends. We spend a lot of time together, and I've learned a lot from her, so I enjoy hearing her story. My story is probably a little bit different. I grew up in a military family for most of middle school and high school. So it was during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era. And my family, we use the term lesbian or dyke as a joke or a derogatory term. So that was never really something I thought was possible, or if I did it was, I'd become the joke of the family. So I was a cheerleader all through middle school, high school, and through college. Long hair and genuinely probably had a boyfriend like every day through high school, just to make sure no one had any idea what was really going on. I can confidently say I didn't have any crushes on any of the cheerleaders I cheered with. Shocker, they have some attitudes, myself included sometimes, but don't mash. So I sit in the closet. I remember my first kiss with a girl was during Truth or Dare, like many of us. The only difference was I was in JROTC wearing a military uniform, and my first sergeant was at the front of the bus and happened to turn around at the same time we were kissing, which meant I beelined it to the front of the bus to be like, it was Truth or Dare, it was a game, we're not doing anything, I swear. I was met with, there's a don't ask, don't tell policy. Miss Battalion, go have a seat. And I turned around and had a seat. I didn't kiss a girl again in high school, at least not in Germany. It took me to my senior year in high school. And my mom, I was back when my mother wasn't a military family anymore, but her parents are Jehovah's Witness. And she had some suspicions. And when Megan would come over, the door had to stay open. Didn't have to stay open with other friends. Didn't even have to stay open with a boy. I did have to stay open with Megan. So that was my like very, very hidden coming out just before college. It was actually the last month of school. So we had some free time. When I went to college, I actually selected a small college in Buffalo that was a Catholic university. It still is. The difference is a Jesuit university. So I see some heads went from not like shaken to, oh, okay, 100%. I felt incredibly accepted from the second I walked onto the campus. But I also did this little tiptoeing thing. So I did another thing most of us do when we come out, which meant I came out as bi. Like we weren't jumping all the way in yet. I didn't date anyone, but I did have a huge crush on my orientation leader because she was spunky and cool and, you know, a couple years older than me. And I was like, okay, of course I can do this. We did start dating actually in December, and we went to go see Rent. It was actually January. My dad had given it to me as my Christmas gift. I had not come out to my parents just yet, just for a friend. When we were leaving the show, we took public transit, which meant a bus. And it was the first time I was holding her hand out down the street, and there were a group of guys that were coming past and the whole catcalling thing, and ignored it. And then they caught on that we were holding hands. And it changed a little bit. And they definitely picked up on the fact that we were together and had some comments. Escalated to the point that we were spat on. Thankfully, that is all that occurred. The bus came, or the train came, we got on the train. They did not. We continued to campus. We actually never talked about it. It was just kind of something that happened and we let it go. It wasn't the last time I experienced something like that. I think there are a lot of stories that are out like that, so I don't have to go into many of them. That relationship didn't last through college, obviously. I did end up coming out to my parents. Their response to me was about time we already knew. I was frustrated because I grew up in a household where that wasn't the case. So for me, I had a little bit of anger on if you had your suspicions, why did you create that environment for me? I actually haven't talked to my parents about that. I probably won't, to be completely honest. I don't currently talk to them. But yeah, the way that kids are raised, it goes a long way. And that definitely went a long way. I did move out of Buffalo and here to Michigan, and haven't had to have too many like new coming out stories until I started working at a corporate industry and in person. And up until recently, I've generally had long hair. When I worked in person, I always wore dresses and heels, and I come across, and there's a term where like I pass. Most people, when they look at me, at least previously, when I didn't wear all the rainbows, I'm a little hard to peg. Am I straight? Am I not? Unless I tell you, most people don't know. With that being said, I am the first person to tell you my identity. for a lot of reasons. One, it's my identity and I'm incredibly proud of it. Two, especially when I worked at a manufacturing site, I knew there were other people like that around me that may not feel that comfortable. So when I worked for the company, I was quite literally known as the gay one, and that was okay by me. 100%, I embraced it. In that course, I was privileged enough to have 4 colleagues come to me and give me their coming out story and give the confidence of knowing that they had an ally that identified like them and showed them that they did have a place whenever they were comfortable with it. So I actually continue to out myself pretty much every opportunity I can get, which is why I wear all the rainbow things. It's not always a positive reception when I am met. There are certain places, certain states that I don't hide who I am. And sometimes if I'm with other people, that can be incredibly uncomfortable. And I recognize that. It's hard to remember sometimes that there is still harm that happens, and coming out and having a coming out story isn't always safe. So for me, I take it as a privilege that I look the way I do. I'm not naive to it anymore, and that it's a little easier to tolerate or accept someone that comes across that you genuinely thought was normal. For them to tell you that they're different, it makes you question. And from firsthand experience, I've seen it in real time on I didn't know that. Or you've known me for 3 or 6 months and you like me, so now what are you gonna do? The majority of the time, their minds are changed. There haven't been many, I think I can probably count on less than one hand, the number that have learned that and have completely walked away. So I am fortunate that I pass, even though I don't always appreciate that I pass. So that's my coming out story, or my journey.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you so much. And then, of course, Tracy probably doesn't need any introduction. She is the head of Outfront today, and before that, she had a long career in politics. So there is Tracy. Thank you, Tracy, for sharing your story.
Good morning. It's easier to be an out gay American than to be a county commissioner when in this time that we are in. I kid you not, although I feel like I have aged. Reverend G, thank you for inviting myself, Nadine, and Kelly to come talk to you all today and share a bit of who we are and our journeys. And as Kelly, you said, it's a process. Reverend G, you talked about people coming out multiple times. Nadine, you spoke upon that as well. We come out a lot, not just once. There's maybe a big one in our lives, or multiple ones, but it really is a journey. For me, it's interesting when I think about what was that big one for me. Well, I've always known, just like Lady Gaga sang, just like in the book that you read, I was born this way. But just because I feel I was born this way doesn't mean that everybody who's part of the LGBTQIA plus community feels that way, right? So I think that's really important. For me, Kelly, you knew when you were little, I think was that, or maybe it's the book. I might be confusing the book. A little both. For me, I've always known. And I can remember, and this is what I was sharing this with Reverend G and Nadine recently. My first coming out moment, I'm only recently labeling it that way. I was on the teeter-totter with my kindergarten teacher. And I said, and I see some friends in this room, so this is the first time I'm publicly sharing this. I said to my kindergarten teacher on the teeter-totter that I had a button that turned me into a boy. This is a long time ago. I think about this a lot lately because what we're hearing in the public school, what we're hearing in the school system, what we're hearing all over the United States. Do you know what my teacher did? She didn't call my mom. She didn't call the psychologist. She didn't call the counselor. She didn't shame me. She listened and she smiled. It was such a supportive moment in my life that I still remember. I don't remember our conversation, the details, but I remember the teeter-totter. I remember her smiling, and I remember feeling proud that I came out, that I had a button as a boy. That was a long time ago. Had I had the language that I have today, or that I've had over the last 15 years, perhaps I would not stand up here today and say I identify as a non-binary lesbian. My pronouns are she and they. And just to say that I didn't stutter. A couple of years ago, I would have stuttered on those words. Not even a couple of years ago, just recently. It's just, this is an evolution, but I've always known who I was in my heart. To the point, Nadine, you said you didn't want your friends to know. I never wanted my friends in high school to know either. I never hugged my girlfriends. Stereotypically, I was in love, and probably still in love with my best friend from high school. Kristen, are you out there on the interwebs? I know you are, but you're married to that handsome principal up there. That's fine. I'm over. It's been a long time. But I remember coming out to her. I came out to her as bi, because sometimes it's just a little bit, but I promised her I did not have feelings for her. I overdid that part, because then we went to the Lilith Fair this is how old I am. We went to the Lilith Fair concert together, and then I remember that one time I said I didn't have feelings for you. I did. I had been in love with you since we were, playing volleyball together. And she said, thank you. I thought something was wrong with me. No, and so for each of us, it's a journey. We come out multiple times. For me, my first time, I think if I had the language, I would have come out and said, I didn't just have a button that turned me into a boy. I am a boy. Instead, I was a tomboy. And I loved everything about being a tomboy. One time somebody confused me and said, when I was probably 6 or 7, and said, your grandson looks just like you, to my grandpa. And that was one of the proudest moments in my life, because my grandpa had red hair. I was a girl, and he wasn't my biological grandpa, but he was one of the most important people in my life. You would have never known. He had been my grandpa all my life. But biologically speaking, wasn't. He was. But anyway, as I grappled with who I was, I just made the assumption that I liked girls, and that I was, a term I had not even known, even then, a lesbian or gay. And I knew of derogatory terms that were used back then and still are used today. And of course, the big one is the F word that a lot of people in the queer community have heard. And I remember drinking a Faygo with my friends, Faygo Rock and Rye, and thinking about that word Faygo and wondering, is this what people think I am? Not knowing the full word, but just knowing that part of the word was really connected, not really connected, but I was probably 9, I don't know. But I share that just because my journey, I knew, without having the language, I knew when I was a little girl, there are people who don't come to their own terms of their own identity when they're little. They could be in their 70s or 80s. They could be when they're 10 or 40 or 50. It really is a journey. And for those of us, that journey takes a long time. For some of us, we're able to come out of the womb and have that supportive family. I think that what the three of us really have in common in sharing this is that we do have some privileges. Even how difficult it can be to hear some of the negative things that are said about each one of us, we mostly haven't lost too many people, right? We have friends who have lost their whole families, who have lost their life, right? Took their own life because this is so tough. I know I didn't really share too much detail about my coming out story, but it is a process. And I'd love to share coming out to my Nana sometime, because she was really adorable and said she bowled with one of them in the 1960s. I guess that's just really it. That's the story. She bowled with one of them in the 1960s. And of course, I must be okay. I'm not a very good bowler. When I came out to one of my closest friends during my undergrad, some of you know Kevin Wertelman. He was the first person in my undergrad that I came out to. And we were on the mock trial team together, and this is 20-something years ago. He's old. I said, I'm a lesbian. I wasn't fooling anyone. I lived with my girlfriend. And he's like, my aunt's a golfer too. So I knew I was okay. I have been really lucky But there are a lot of people who aren't lucky. I haven't seen it and felt it this bad in our lifetime, so in my lifetime. Really, the 80s, yes, bad. I was younger, but as an adult, having to deal with the backlash, the homophobia, the transphobia, the biphobia, the queerphobia that we're hearing. It's an honor to work out front, but it's a really stressful role. You all know it. You had to endure it this past spring. We are lucky to count you all as friends and part of our Faith Alliance, which is one of our oldest programs. But I'm also lucky to have friends and allies in this room. When I look at Mary and I see Ron and of course Nikki, we're on the same. But Mary and Ron never judged me. They never closed their eyes. Neither did Nancy. Just waving to the interwebs. I was lucky. Not so many people are as lucky, have been as lucky. It's a really tough time right now to exist. We were just in Vicksburg, sorry, to talk about the fact that they're being sued because of a young trans student wanting to use the restroom of her identity that affirmed her and who she was. She has since gone on to another school. We have spoken at Galesburg Augusta about banning important books. We're seeing that Ban Book Week this week was more important to me than it had been, and I've always counted myself as a civil libertarian, so it's always been important. I could go on and on and on. I just really wanted to say thank you for being supportive of Outfront and the LGBTQIA+ community, being our friends, being our partners in this work, because we need it now more than we have needed it in probably 25 years, 30 years. And I'd like to think it's going to get better. It will get better. It gets better. Maybe some darkness still ahead of us. So thank you for having me, Reverend G. I can't say no to you. But, thank you, everyone.
Well, there's a few things, thank you, Tracy. And I love it that you can't say no to me. I'll probably take you up on that again. I'm realizing that time is past, but there's a few things still I would like to say, if that is all right with you. Is it? How about with you there on the interwebs? Please stick with us for another minute. Thank you for sharing your stories. And these are just 3. And these are the lucky ones. But to hear it, though, it's painful. Because there's Kelly, who went through a lifetime of depression and addiction. And then finally, late in life, much later in adult life, she decides to come out and she decides to own herself. And then things are starting better, but there's the fear, the underlying fear the entire time. When we come out, what that is about is, am I okay? Am I okay with you? What will you think of me? How will you receive me? How will you perceive me? How will this change my world? Will you still be in it? And how? And these are the lucky ones. I'm not that lucky. My family is completely divided over this. I have a sister I have no relationship with my parents, barely any. I have a sister with whom stories are different. They vary. Like I said, they're legion. And the good ones are far and few in between. Even when we count ourselves lucky, it's like war veterans sharing stories of wounding. Well, we survived it. We're the lucky ones because we survived it, but there are all these wounds. And then we share our coming out stories, just like war veterans share their wounding stories. The world calls it homophobia. Homophobia. Are there really straight people in their homes sitting there fearing gay people? Like gay people are going to come in their homes and do something to them? Is it really appropriate and accurate to call it homophobia? Because I just don't think so. I just really don't think that straight people are sitting in their homes fearing the gays. I think they're fearing something different. I think what they are fearing, that if they extend equal rights to gays, And by that, I mean the trans people as well, to the LGBTQIA plus community. If they extend equal rights, society somehow will change, and it will no longer reflect the values that they think they hold and people should live by. So then they say things like, well, marriage. Look at the definition of marriage. Look at Webster Dictionary. Marriage is between a man and a woman. And therefore, what you are trying to get here is wrong because you're man and man and woman and woman. This just makes a strong point that words are inaccurate and that definitions should be worked with. Because what are more important? Words and definitions, or people and love? And I think it matters. There is a huge difference. There is no homophobia. There is just a fear that life will change if we extend equal rights. We'll probe it. World, probe it. Give it a try. You've given this one a try for long enough. Give the new one a try and see. And perhaps you can then let go of any phobia. Perhaps then you will just learn that we are just as unremarkable as any other people, that we are just as ordinary as any other people, that we can enrich your life just as any other people, and then you will learn that gay people get divorced too, now that marriage is afforded to all of us. So it is time for a change because we are tired. It is tiring to wonder what will happen. Is this church ready for a gay minister? Is that church ready for a gay minister? There are ministers who just wonder, is this church good for me? And then there are others who have to wonder about more. We are tired of having to come out. We are tired of having to worry whether we'll be okay with each other if we come out. We are just tired. We've been through enough, so let's just accept. Let's just embrace. Let's just let be. Everybody. And of course, I know that here I am speaking to the choir. But you, when you go out there, be brave. Be brave. And when you encounter people who are homophobic, be brave and speak up. Be our ambassadors. Speak for us. Change the world for us because we're tired. And it's so good that we can work together. It's so good that we still have communities that we can rely on and trust. And it's so bad that there's still so much work to do. And yet, this is the lay of the land. And I do hope that in my lifetime, Tracy will work herself out of a job, that there will be no need for an out front. But I'm afraid I'm just being just a bit too optimistic and idealistic and naive. Tracy, you will have a job for some time to come, and probably you will have a successor too. But hopefully, society has changed much already. And hopefully it will change more and more, and it will become easier and easier. And in the meantime, let's just be honest. Let's just be honest. That what we fear is unreal. Society will not change if we get equal rights. Society will be the same. The sun will come up in the east. It will go to rest in the west. I'm pretty sure the seasons will keep changing. If anything will affect that, will be climate change, not the gays. And the children will be born, and then the elderly will pass on. And it shall all be the same. we will just embrace each other and accept each other and make life just a little bit easier for one another. And so it is. Thank you.